Thomas had been standing guard at the palace gates for 3 hours straight. His uniform felt heavy against his shoulders, and the metal buttons caught the morning sunlight as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Being a royal sentry wasn't just about looking impressive in his red coat and tall black hat. Every day brought new challenges, new threats to watch for, and new responsibilities that weighed on his mind. The palace courtyard buzzed with activity as servants hurried between the main building and the kitchens. Carriages rolled through the iron gates, their wheels clicking against the cobblestone paths. Thomas recognized most of the regular visitors, the ministers, the merchants, and the nobles who came to conduct business with the royal family. His sharp eyes caught everything, from the nervous fidgeting of a first-time visitor to the confident stride of someone who belonged in these grand halls. Princess emerged from the main entrance, her pale blue dress flowing behind her as she walked. Thomas straightened his posture automatically. The princess had always been kind to the palace staff, often stopping to ask about their families or thank them for their service. Today, however, something seemed different about her usual graceful manner. She moved more slowly than usual, one hand pressed lightly against her lower back. Her face, normally bright with a gentle smile, appeared strained. Thomas noticed how she paused at the top of the marble steps, gripping the stone railing for a moment before continuing down toward the gardens. Lord Advisor Harrison approached from the opposite direction, his dark robes billowing in the gentle breeze. He was an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, someone the royal family trusted completely. Thomas had seen him rushing in and out of important meetings, always carrying thick folders of documents and wearing a serious expression. The princess and the advisor met near the fountain in the center of the courtyard. Thomas couldn't hear their conversation from his post, but he could see their body language clearly. The advisor's eyebrows drew together in concern as he studied the princess's face. She gestured toward her back, then toward the palace, as if explaining something important. A group of foreign diplomats walked past Thomas's station, their colorful uniforms marking them as visitors from the neighboring kingdom. He nodded respectfully as they passed, but his attention remained focused on the conversation happening near the fountain. Years of training had taught him to stay alert to anything unusual, and the princess's obvious discomfort definitely qualified as unusual. The morning sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the courtyard. Thomas felt sweat beginning to form under his heavy uniform, but he maintained his professional stance. Other guards moved through their regular patrols, checking the perimeter and monitoring the various entrances to the palace grounds. Kitchen staff emerged from the service doors, carrying fresh bread and vegetables from the morning market trip. The smell of baking bread drifted across the courtyard, mixing with the fragrance of roses from the royal gardens. Normal palace life continued around them, but Thomas kept watching the princess and her advisor. The princess sat down on the edge of the fountain, something Thomas had never seen her do before. Royal protocol usually required her to maintain perfect posture and formal behavior when in public areas of the palace. The advisor moved closer, his voice becoming more animated as he spoke. Thomas could see genuine worry etched across the older man's features. A messenger boy ran across the courtyard, his leather satchel bouncing against his hip as he hurried toward the main building. The boy stumbled slightly on the uneven cobblestones, but caught himself and continued running. Thomas made a mental note to have the maintenance crew check those stones later. The princess stood up again, but immediately sat back down. This time her movement was sharp and sudden, as if something had caused her unexpected pain. Thomas felt his muscles tense involuntarily. His training told him to stay at his post unless directly ordered otherwise, but every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Lord Advisor Harrison knelt beside the princess, his formal demeanor replaced by genuine concern. Thomas could see him speaking quickly, his hands moving expressively as he tried to understand what was happening. The princess nodded, then shook her head, then pressed both hands against her lower back. The palace bells chimed 10 o'clock, their deep tones echoing across the courtyard. Thomas had been on duty since 7, and normally the morning hours passed quickly with the steady flow of visitors and daily business. Today felt different. Time seemed to move more slowly as he watched the scene unfold near the fountain. 2 ladies-in-waiting appeared from the palace entrance, their long dresses rustling as they walked quickly across the courtyard. Thomas recognized them as Sarah and 2 young women who served as the princess's personal assistants and companions. They had probably noticed her absence from her scheduled morning activities. The ladies-in-waiting reached the fountain and immediately flanked the princess, their faces showing alarm at her condition. Sarah knelt down and spoke quietly to her, while looked around as if searching for additional help. The advisor continued his animated conversation, occasionally gesturing toward the palace building. Thomas noticed other palace staff beginning to take notice of the situation. A gardener working nearby kept glancing over while pretending to tend to his flower beds. Two stable boys had stopped their work and were openly staring from across the courtyard. The unusual scene was drawing attention, despite everyone's efforts to appear busy with their regular duties. The princess attempted to stand once more, this time with help from both ladies-in-waiting. She managed to get to her feet, but immediately doubled over slightly, her face contorting with what was clearly significant pain. Thomas felt his jaw clench as he fought the urge to abandon his post and offer assistance. A senior guard approached Thomas's position from the left. Captain was a veteran of 20 years of palace service, a man who had seen everything and handled every conceivable situation with calm professionalism. His weathered face showed concern as he stopped beside Thomas. "Something's happening with the princess," Captain said quietly, his voice barely audible to anyone passing by. "I've been watching from the north gate. This isn't normal protocol." Thomas nodded slightly, keeping his eyes forward but speaking from the corner of his mouth. "She's been in obvious pain for the past 20 minutes. The advisor looks worried." The captain studied the scene for a few moments, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. "I'm going to check with the palace physician's office. Stay alert and report anything unusual immediately." As Captain walked away, Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settling more heavily on his shoulders. The princess was clearly suffering from some kind of medical emergency, and everyone present was trying to figure out the best course of action. The formal protocols that governed daily palace life weren't designed for situations like this. A carriage approached the main gate, and Thomas automatically straightened to check the passengers. It was Doctor, the royal physician, arriving earlier than his usual afternoon appointment time. Someone must have sent word to his private residence. The doctor's presence confirmed that the situation was being treated as a serious medical matter. Doctor hurried across the courtyard toward the fountain, his black medical bag swinging at his side. Thomas felt a small measure of relief knowing that professional medical help was now available. Whatever was causing the princess's pain, at least she would receive proper care from someone qualified to help her. Doctor reached the fountain and immediately began examining the princess while she remained seated on the stone edge. Thomas watched as the physician asked questions and gently checked her condition, his movements professional and efficient. The ladies-in-waiting stepped back to give him room to work, but stayed close enough to provide assistance if needed. Lord Advisor Harrison pulled out a small notebook and began writing quickly, probably documenting the situation for official records. The palace operated on detailed documentation of everything that happened, especially anything involving the royal family's health and every incident, no matter how minor, became part of the permanent historical record. The princess spoke to Doctor, her words too quiet for Thomas to hear from his distant position. The physician nodded seriously and made notes in his own small book. His facial expression remained neutral and professional, but Thomas noticed how he kept glancing toward the palace building, as if considering whether she needed to be moved indoors immediately. More palace staff had begun to notice the gathering near the fountain. Thomas saw servants peering out from windows in the main building, their curiosity obvious despite their attempts to remain discreet. The head housekeeper, Mrs., appeared in the doorway but stayed back, clearly torn between wanting to help and understanding that too many people crowding around would only make the situation worse. A second carriage arrived at the main gate, this one carrying 2 additional medical assistants. Thomas recognized them as Doctor's regular associates, skilled professionals who often helped with routine medical care for the palace staff and residents. Their presence suggested that whatever was happening with the princess required more than just a simple examination. The princess tried to stand again with support from Doctor and one of the ladies-in-waiting. This time she managed to stay upright for several seconds before her knees buckled slightly. The pain was clearly getting worse rather than better, and Thomas could see genuine alarm beginning to spread among the people surrounding her. Captain returned to Thomas's position, his face grim. I've spoken with the palace administrator. They're preparing the princess's private chambers for immediate medical care. Doctor has requested additional supplies and equipment. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. Is it serious? They don't know yet, the captain replied quietly. But they're treating it as potentially serious until they understand what's causing the pain. The medical assistants reached the fountain carrying a small stretcher and additional medical supplies. Doctor spoke with them briefly, pointing toward the palace and making gestures that suggested urgency. The princess shook her head when she saw the stretcher, clearly preferring to walk under her own power if possible. A compromise was reached where the princess would lean heavily on Doctor and one assistant, while the ladies-in-waiting supported her other arm. The slow procession began moving toward the palace entrance, with Lord Advisor Harrison walking alongside and continuing to take notes of everything that happened. Thomas watched as they made their way across the courtyard, the princess's obvious struggle to walk normally visible with each careful step. Other palace staff stopped their work to watch respectfully as the group passed, many of them removing their hats or bowing their heads in concern for their beloved princess. The main palace doors opened wide as they approached, and Thomas could see additional medical personnel waiting inside. The palace's medical wing had been alerted and was apparently preparing for a full examination and treatment protocol. Whatever was causing the princess's pain, the medical staff was taking every precaution to ensure she received the best possible care. As the group disappeared into the palace, Thomas felt the tension in the courtyard begin to shift. The immediate crisis was now out of public view, but the concern remained. Palace staff continued their duties, but conversations were hushed, and everyone seemed to be waiting for updates about the princess's condition. An hour passed with no news. Thomas remained at his post, watching the normal flow of palace business resume around him. Visitors continued to arrive for their scheduled appointments, unaware of the medical emergency that had just unfolded. The gardeners returned to their work, the stable boys resumed caring for the horses, and the kitchen staff continued preparing meals. Captain made regular checks on all the guard positions, his usual routine unchanged, but his expression more serious than normal. During one of his stops at Thomas's station, he shared what little information had filtered down from the palace administrators. Doctor has called for additional specialists, the captain reported quietly. They're treating this as a significant medical situation requiring careful attention and possibly extended treatment. Thomas nodded, feeling worried about the princess who had always treated the palace staff with such kindness and respect. Any word on what might be causing the pain? Not yet. Medical matters involving the royal family are kept confidential until there's official word to share with the staff. The afternoon brought a steady stream of carriages as various medical specialists arrived at the palace. Thomas recognized some of them as doctors who had visited before for routine care, but others were unfamiliar, suggesting they had been called in specifically for this emergency. Each new arrival reinforced the seriousness of whatever the princess was experiencing. Lord Advisor Harrison emerged from the palace briefly to speak with some of the arriving specialists, directing them to the appropriate entrance and providing them with necessary information. His usual calm demeanor showed signs of strain, and Thomas could see the worry lines around his eyes even from a distance. The palace bells chimed 3 o'clock, marking Thomas's 8th hour of duty. Normally he would be relieved by the afternoon guard shift, but Captain had indicated that all current personnel should remain at their posts until the medical situation stabilized. No one wanted to risk any security gaps during such an important time. A messenger arrived on horseback, riding hard and covered in dust from a long journey. Thomas checked his credentials at the gate before directing him toward the administrative offices. Important news traveled fast in the kingdom, and word of the princess's condition was probably already spreading to allied nobles and neighboring royalty. Doctor emerged from the palace accompanied by 2 of the specialist physicians. They walked quickly toward one of the carriages, their body language suggesting they needed additional medical supplies or equipment that wasn't immediately available in the palace medical wing. The urgency of their movement made Thomas's worry deepen. The ladies-in-waiting, Sarah and appeared on one of the palace balconies overlooking the courtyard. They stood together, watching the activity below with obvious concern for their mistress. Thomas had often seen them laughing and chatting with the princess during her daily walks through the gardens. Today, their usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by anxious waiting. Another specialist carriage arrived, this one carrying what appeared to be more sophisticated medical equipment. Thomas could see wooden boxes being carefully unloaded and carried into the palace, handled with the kind of care reserved for delicate and valuable instruments. The scope of the medical response continued to expand. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas began to notice subtle changes in the palace atmosphere. Staff members moved more quietly through the corridors, conversations were conducted in whispers, and there was an overall sense of waiting for important news. The princess's condition was clearly affecting everyone who lived and worked in the palace. Captain approached Thomas's position again as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. "There's been a development," he said quietly. "Doctor has requested that a message be sent to the princess's family members in the neighboring provinces. They're being asked to come to the palace as soon as possible." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Calling family members usually meant that a medical situation was either very serious or potentially life-threatening. "How bad is it, Captain?" "I don't have specific details, but the palace administrator has activated the emergency communication protocols. That tells us this goes beyond a simple medical issue that can be resolved quickly." The implications of this news weighed heavily on Thomas as he continued his watch. The princess was not just a member of the royal family, but a beloved figure who represented hope and continuity for the entire kingdom. Her affected not just the palace staff, but potentially thousands of citizens who looked to the royal family for stability and leadership. Evening shadows began stretching across the palace courtyard as Thomas entered his 10th hour of continuous guard duty. The normal changing of the guard had been postponed indefinitely while the medical emergency continued. Other sentries had been brought in to cover additional posts, but the core security team remained at their stations to maintain consistency during the crisis. Doctor finally emerged from the palace after nearly 6 hours of continuous medical attention to the princess. His usually neat appearance showed signs of the long, intensive work session. Thomas watched as the physician walked slowly toward his carriage, his shoulders sagging with obvious fatigue and concern. Lord Advisor Harrison accompanied Doctor to his carriage, and Thomas could see them engaged in serious conversation. The advisor's notebook had grown thick with pages of documentation throughout the day, and he continued writing even as they talked. Whatever was being discussed was clearly important enough to require detailed official records. As Doctor prepared to leave, another carriage arrived carrying additional family members. Thomas recognized the princess's aunt, Lady Elizabeth, and her cousin, Prince William, both of whom lived in the eastern province and had apparently traveled through the night to reach the palace. Their swift arrival confirmed the serious nature of the medical situation. The family members hurried into the palace without the usual formal greetings and ceremonies that normally accompanied royal visits. Their urgent pace and worried expressions told Thomas everything he needed to know about how they viewed the princess's condition. This was not a routine family gathering. Captain gathered all the guards for a brief meeting near the main gate as the sun set completely behind the palace walls. Oil lamps were being lit throughout the courtyard, casting flickering shadows that danced across the cobblestones. The captain's weathered face looked even more serious in the lamplight. "I've received updated instructions from the palace administrator," he announced quietly. "The princess's condition remains serious, and we're implementing enhanced security protocols through the night. No unauthorized personnel are to enter the palace grounds, and all visitors must be specifically approved by the administrative office." Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settling even more heavily on his shoulders. Enhanced security protocols meant they were treating this as a potential state emergency. If something happened to the princess, it could affect the entire kingdom's stability and future. The palace windows glowed with warm light as evening turned to full darkness. Thomas could see shadows moving behind the curtains in what he knew was the medical wing, indicating that treatment was continuing around the clock. Additional oil lamps had been placed in the corridors to ensure the medical staff had adequate lighting for their work. A messenger arrived from the capital city, carrying what appeared to be official documents sealed with the royal stamp. Thomas checked his credentials carefully before allowing him through the gates. Communication between the palace and other government officials was clearly being maintained throughout the crisis. Lady Elizabeth emerged from the palace briefly, accompanied by one of the ladies-in-waiting. They walked slowly through the garden paths, their conversation obviously serious and emotional. Thomas could see Lady Elizabeth wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, suggesting that the news about her niece was deeply troubling. Around midnight, Thomas noticed increased activity in the palace medical wing. More lamps were lit, and he could see additional figures moving through the corridors. Doctor had returned with more medical specialists, and it appeared that some kind of critical treatment or procedure was taking place. The palace bells chimed 1 o'clock in the morning, their deep tones echoing across the quiet courtyard. Thomas had now been on duty for 18 straight hours, but the importance of the situation made his personal fatigue seem insignificant. The princess's was far more important than his own comfort. Captain approached Thomas's position carrying a cup of hot tea and some bread from the palace kitchen. The kitchen staff insisted that all guards receive food and drink throughout the night, he explained. They're as worried about the princess as everyone else, and they want to make sure we stay alert and healthy. Thomas accepted the refreshments gratefully, realizing that he hadn't eaten since early morning. The warm tea helped combat the cool night air, and the bread provided much-needed energy for the long watch ahead. The kitchen staff's thoughtfulness reminded him of how the princess's condition was affecting everyone in the palace community. Doctor emerged from the palace again around 2 o'clock, this time accompanied by 3 other physicians. They stood together near the fountain where the crisis had first begun, their conversation animated and clearly focused on treatment options. Thomas could see them gesturing and occasionally pointing back toward the medical wing. One of the specialists broke away from the group and walked quickly toward a waiting carriage. Within minutes, the carriage departed at high speed, suggesting that some kind of emergency medical supply or equipment was needed immediately. The urgency of the situation seemed to be escalating rather than stabilizing. Lord Advisor Harrison appeared in one of the palace windows, still awake and actively involved in managing the crisis. Thomas could see him writing at a desk, probably updating official records and communicating with other government officials about the situation. The administrative aspects of a royal medical emergency were apparently as complex as the medical treatment itself. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Thomas heard what sounded like a cry of pain coming from the direction of the medical wing. The sound was muffled by the palace walls, but it was audible enough to make him tense with concern. Whatever treatment was being administered, it was clearly causing the princess significant distress. The carriage that had departed earlier returned at high speed, carrying wooden boxes that were immediately rushed into the palace. Thomas could see palace staff carefully handling the containers, suggesting they contained delicate or valuable medical supplies. The rapid response indicated that the medical team was exploring every possible treatment option. Doctor and his team worked through the night without apparent rest. Thomas occasionally saw them moving between different rooms in the medical wing, their shadows visible through the lit windows. The continuous activity suggested that the princess's condition required constant monitoring and adjustment of treatment. As dawn approached, Thomas noticed a change in the atmosphere around the palace. The frantic activity of the night hours seemed to be settling into a more stable rhythm. Doctor emerged from the palace looking exhausted, but somewhat less concerned than he had appeared during the night hours. Lord Advisor Harrison joined Doctor near the fountain, and Thomas could see them having what appeared to be a more positive conversation than the urgent discussions of the previous hours. The advisor's notebook remained active, but his posture seemed less tense and worried. The morning sun began to illuminate the palace courtyard as Thomas completed his 24-hour watch. Captain approached with news that the princess's condition had stabilized during the night, though she remained under intensive medical care and observation. The immediate crisis appears to have passed, the captain reported quietly. Doctor has indicated that the princess is resting more comfortably, though her recovery will require careful monitoring and continued treatment over the coming days. Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him as he realized that the beloved princess would likely recover from whatever had caused her such severe pain. The long night of worry and uncertainty had taken its toll on everyone at the palace, but the medical team's dedication and skill had apparently succeeded in stabilizing her condition. As the palace began its return to normal daily operations, Thomas reflected on how the crisis had brought together everyone who lived and worked in the royal residence. From the highest-ranking advisors to the kitchen staff, everyone had contributed to ensuring that the princess received the best possible care during her medical emergency. The experience had reminded him why his role as a royal sentry was about more than just standing guard and checking credentials. He was part of a community dedicated to protecting and serving the royal family, and that responsibility extended far beyond the normal duties outlined in his training manual. As Thomas finally prepared to end his extended watch, he felt a deep sense of pride in having played his part during such an important and challenging time. The princess's recovery would allow the palace to return to its normal routines, but the memory of how everyone had worked together during the crisis would remain with him for years to come.